A millionaire was humiliated for looking poor, and look what happened. One day later, the crystal chandeliers of Le Palais d'Or cast a warm golden glow over the plush crimson carpets and gleaming mahogany tables. The air was thick with the aroma of truffle-infused dishes and the gentle clink of fine china. This was Boston's most exclusive restaurant, where the elite came to see and be seen, where reservations were often made months in advance, and where the maitre d' wielded more power than some small-town mayors. On this particular Friday evening, William Thorne pushed open the heavy glass door, a gust of chilly autumn air following him inside. He stood for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim, intimate lighting. William was a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. His salt-and-pepper hair was slightly disheveled, his face adorned with a neatly trimmed beard that had seen better days. He wore a plain grey sweater, faded jeans, and scuffed brown loafers that had clearly seen miles of city sidewalks. As he approached the maitre d's podium, he could feel eyes upon him. The other patrons, draped in designer labels and dripping with jewels, regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. William paid them no mind. He'd long ago learned to ignore such superficial judgments. "Good evening," William said, his voice soft but firm. "I have a reservation for one under the name Thorne." The maitre d', a tall, thin man with a pencil moustache and an air of superiority, looked down his nose at William. His eyes scanned the simple attire lingering on the worn loafers. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "but I'm afraid there must be some mistake. We have no reservation under that name." William's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. I made the reservation myself just last week. Please check again." The maitre d' made a show of flipping through his leather-bound reservation book, his lips pursed in an exaggerated frown. "I'm terribly sorry, but there's simply no reservation for a Thorne." He pronounced the name as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. By now, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance, watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. William could hear whispers and snickers behind him. He took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. "Look," he said, leaning in closer to the podium, "there must be some misunderstanding. I'm sure if you just check your system—" "Sir," the maitre d' interrupted, his voice sharp, "I can assure you that our system is impeccable. Now, if you don't mind, we have actual paying customers waiting." William felt a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. "I am a paying customer," he insisted, "or at least I would be if you'd honor my reservation." The maitre d's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Sir, this is a high-class establishment. We have standards to maintain. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the casual dining options down the street." The implication was clear, and it stung more than William cared to admit. He'd faced prejudice before, but never so blatantly, never in a place where he'd expected to be welcomed as a valued patron. "I understand your standards," William replied, his voice low and controlled, "and I assure you I can meet them. Now I'd like to speak to the manager, please." The maitre d' straightened, his face flushing with indignation. "I am the manager, sir, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and quite frankly, you're disrupting our other guests." William looked around. Indeed, several tables of diners were openly staring now, some with looks of pity, others with smug amusement. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a mixture of anger and humiliation that he hadn't experienced in years. For a moment, he considered revealing his true identity. It would be so easy to pull out his phone, make a call, and watch as the color drained from the maitre d's face. But that wasn't his way. William Thorne had built his fortune on the principle of quiet dignity, of letting his actions speak louder than any boast or threat. So instead, he simply nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I see," he said softly. "Well, I wouldn't want to disrupt your evening. Thank you for your time." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a young waiter watching the scene unfold. The waiter, a handsome man in his late 20s with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable, as if he wanted to intervene but didn't dare challenge the manager. William made eye contact with the young man for a brief moment before pushing open the door and stepping back out into the cool night air. As he walked away from Le Palais d'Or, he could still hear the muffled laughter and chatter from inside, but his mind was already elsewhere, formulating a plan, This wasn't over, not by a long shot. William Thorne might value simplicity and avoid the limelight, but he was far from powerless, and he had just been handed a valuable lesson, one that he intended to pass on in his own unique way. As he hailed a cab to take him home, William pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hello, Jonathan, it's Will. Listen, I need a favor. How quickly can you get me in touch with Harold Beaumont?" The pieces were already falling into place. Le Palais d'Or had no idea what was coming their way. And William Thorne, the man in the plain grey sweater, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile as he settled into the back seat of the taxi, his mind already racing with possibilities. The cab pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the glittering facade of Le Palais d'Or. As the lights of the restaurant faded in the rear-view mirror, so too did William's humiliation, replaced by a steely determination. The game was afoot, and William Thorne was nothing if not a master strategist. The following morning, William Thorne sat in his modestly furnished home office, a cup of black coffee cooling on the desk beside him. Despite his considerable wealth, his living space was simple and functional. The walls were adorned with a few carefully chosen pieces of art, each with a story behind it, each a reminder of the journey that had brought him to where he was today. He leaned back in his chair, phone pressed to his ear, listening intently. On the other end of the line was Harold Beaumont, owner of Le Palais d'Or, and, as it happened, an old friend from William's college days. "Will, my friend." Harold's booming voice filled the room, even through the phone speaker. "It's been far too long. To what do I owe the pleasure?" William smiled despite himself. Harold had always been larger than life, in stark contrast to William's own reserved nature. "Harold, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I was wondering if you might be free for dinner tomorrow evening." "For you, Will. I'll make time, but why the sudden invitation? You're not usually one for spontaneous social calls." William paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I had an interesting experience at your establishment last night. I think it's something we should discuss in person." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When Harold spoke again, his voice was tinged with concern. "Will, what happened? Was there a problem with the service?" "You could say that," William replied, his tone measured, "but I'd rather not get into the details over the phone." "How about we meet at Le Palais d'Or tomorrow at 7? I think it would be enlightening for both of us," Harold agreed, his curiosity clearly piqued. As William hung up the phone, he allowed himself a small sigh of satisfaction. The first piece of his plan was in place. Next, he turned his attention to his computer. With a few quick keystrokes, he pulled up the personnel files for Le Palais d'Or. Being a silent partner in Harold's restaurant group had its perks, including access to information that most patrons would never see. His eyes scanned the list of employees until he found what he was looking for. Michael Chen, age 28, waiter, the young man with the kind eyes who had witnessed William's humiliation the night before. William jotted down a few notes, then picked up his phone once more. This time, he dialed his personal assistant. "Sarah, I need you to arrange a discreet background check on someone. A Michael Chen works at Le Palais d'Or. I'm particularly interested in his personal life, any financial struggles, that sort of thing. And Sarah, this stays between us." As he hung up, William felt a twinge of guilt. He wasn't usually one to pry into others' personal lives, but for his plan to work, he needed all the information he could get. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and preparations. By the time evening fell, William felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would be a day of reckoning, not just for the haughty maitre d' and the judgmental patrons of Le Palais d'Or, but for William himself. As he prepared for bed that night, William caught sight of his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at him was not the billionaire tech mogul that the business world knew. He was just a man in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, with lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. For a moment he wondered if he was doing the right thing. Was this elaborate plan really necessary? Wouldn't it be simpler to just let it go, to chalk it up to a bad experience and move on? But then he remembered the sneers, the whispers, the feeling of being judged and found wanting based solely on his appearance. He thought of all the others who might have faced similar treatment, those without the means or the connections to fight back. No, he decided, this wasn't just about him. This was about sending a message, about teaching a lesson that went beyond the walls of one pretentious restaurant. With renewed resolve, William climbed into bed. Tomorrow would be a day of revelations, of masks stripped away and truths laid bare. And at the center of it all would be William Thorne, the unassuming millionaire in the plain grey sweater. As he drifted off to sleep, William's mind was already racing with the possibilities that tomorrow would bring. The stage was set, the actors were in place. All that remained was for the curtain to rise on what promised to be the performance of a lifetime. The next evening, William stood once again before the gleaming doors of Le Palais d'Or. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Harold Beaumont, resplendent in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Harold's presence alone was enough to turn heads. He was a local celebrity, known as much for his flamboyant personality as for his string of successful restaurants. "Will, my friend," Harold said, clapping a hand on William's shoulder. "Are you going to tell me what this is all about? You've been infuriatingly vague." William gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Patience, Harold. All will become clear soon enough." As they approached the entrance, William felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He was dressed exactly as he had been the night before, plain grey sweater, faded jeans, scuffed loafers. The contrast between him and Harold couldn't have been more stark. The same maître d' from the previous night stood at his podium, his eyes widening as he recognized Harold. "Mr. Beaumont, what an unexpected pleasure. Your usual table is ready, of course." Harold beamed. "Excellent, Claude. But first, allow me to introduce my dear friend and business associate, William Thorne." Claude's eyes slid from Harold to William, confusion evident on his face. There was a flicker of recognition, quickly replaced by horror as he realized his mistake from the night before. Mr. Thorne," Claude stammered, his usual composure completely shattered. There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to explain." William held up a hand, silencing him. "No explanation necessary, Claude. Why don't you show us to our table? I believe we have much to discuss." As they made their way through the restaurant, William could feel the weight of every gaze upon them. The other diners, many of whom had witnessed his humiliation the night before, now watched in stunned silence as he walked arm in arm with the owner himself. They settled into a prime table, one with a clear view of the entire restaurant. Harold, still oblivious to the underlying tension, ordered a bottle of their finest champagne. "Now, Will," Harold said, leaning forward eagerly, "are you finally going to tell me what's going on? The suspense is killing me." William took a deep breath. "Harold, I'm afraid your restaurant has a problem. A rather serious one, in fact." He proceeded to recount the events of the previous night in detail, the denied reservation, the condescending treatment, the blatant discrimination. With each word, Harold's jovial expression faded, replaced by a mix of shock and anger. "This is unacceptable," Harold growled, his face flushed. "I'll have Claude fired immediately. In fact, I'll clean house. Anyone involved in this disgraceful behavior will be—" "Wait," William interrupted, placing a calming hand on Harold's arm. "Before you do anything rash, I have a proposition for you." Just then their waiter arrived, none other than Michael Chen, the young man who had witnessed William's mistreatment the night before. Michael's eyes widened in recognition as he saw William, a mix of guilt and fear crossing his face. "Good evening, gentlemen," Michael said, his voice slightly shaky. "Can I start you off with any appetizers?" William smiled warmly at the young man. "Actually, Michael, if you don't mind, I'd like you to join us for a moment. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Michael glanced nervously at Harold, who nodded his assent. Hesitantly, the young waiter pulled up a chair and sat down. "Michael," William began, his voice gentle but firm, "I understand you're currently facing some financial difficulties. A sick mother, mounting medical bills, is that correct?" Michael's face paled. How did you know that?" William waved his hand dismissively. "That's not important right now. What's important is that I have a proposition for you as well. But first, I need you to do something for me." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring out every staff member who was working last night. Can you do that for me?" Michael nodded, still looking bewildered. As he hurried off to fulfill William's request, Harold leaned back in his chair, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. "Will," he said slowly, "what exactly are you planning?" William's eyes twinkled with a mix of mischief and determination. "Justice, Harold, and perhaps a little bit of enlightenment." As the staff began to file out of the kitchen, led by a still confused Michael, William straightened in his chair. The stage was set, the actors were in place. It was time for the real show to begin. The patrons of Le Palais d'Or, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold, fell into a hushed silence. All eyes were on the unassuming man in the grey sweater who suddenly seemed to command the attention of the entire room. William Thorne, the quiet millionaire, was about to turn the world of Le Palais d'Or upside down, and as he looked around at the expectant faces surrounding him, he knew that this was a moment that would be remembered for a long, long time. The staff of Le Palais d'Or gathered around William and Harold's table, a mix of confusion and apprehension on their faces. The restaurant had fallen into an expectant hush, with even the kitchen staff peering out from behind the swinging doors. William stood, his presence somehow filling the room despite his unassuming appearance. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice calm, but carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is William Thorne. Some of you may remember me from last night, though I doubt many of you took the time to learn my name then." A ripple of discomfort passed through the assembled staff. Claude, the maitre d', looked as though he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "I'm not here to shame anyone or to demand retribution," William continued. "I'm here to share a story and, hopefully, impart a valuable lesson." He began to recount the events of the previous evening, painting a vivid picture of the discrimination and humiliation he had faced. As he spoke, he could see the dawning horror on the faces of the staff, many of whom had been present, but had chosen to remain silent. "Now, I could have easily revealed my identity last night. I could have made a phone call and had this place shut down before dessert was served, but that's not who I am, and it's not what I believe in." William paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Instead, I want to use this as an opportunity for growth, for all of us." He turned to Harold, who nodded encouragingly. "With Harold's permission, I'm going to be implementing some changes here at Le Palais d'Or. First and foremost, we'll be instituting a new training program focused on empathy, inclusivity, and non-judgmental customer service." A murmur went through the crowd. William held up his hand for silence. "Additionally, I will be personally funding a scholarship program for the staff. This program will cover educational expenses for those looking to further their careers in the hospitality industry or pursue other dreams." At this, Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. William caught his gaze and gave him a small nod. "But there's a catch," William continued, his voice taking on a sterner tone. "Those who participated in or silently condoned the discriminatory behavior last night will be required to undergo additional sensitivity training. And yes, some positions may need to be reconsidered." Claude visibly flinched at these words, but William wasn't finished. "However, I believe in second chances. Those who show genuine remorse and a willingness to change will be given the opportunity to do so." William then turned to Michael, who was standing at the edge of the group, still looking stunned. "Michael, step forward, please." The young waiter approached hesitantly, his face a mix of hope and fear. "Michael, you were the only one who showed any sign of discomfort with how I was treated last night. While you didn't speak up, I could see in your eyes that you wanted to. For that reason, and because of the character reference I received from your colleagues, I'd like to offer you a promotion. How would you feel about becoming our new assistant manager, overseeing the implementation of our new inclusivity initiatives?" Michael's jaw dropped. "Mr. Thorne, I don't know what to say." "Thank you, sir, I won't let you down." William smiled warmly. "I know you won't, Michael, and please call me Will." He then addressed the entire staff once more. "I want Le Palais d'Or to be known not just for its exquisite food and ambience, but for its exceptional treatment of all guests, regardless of their appearance or background. Can I count on all of you to help make that happen?" There was a moment of silence, then a chorus of "Yes, sir," rang out through the restaurant. As the staff began to disperse, processing the whirlwind of events, William turned back to Harold, who was beaming with pride. "Will, my friend," Harold said, clapping him on the back, You never cease to amaze me. You've turned what could have been a PR nightmare into an opportunity for growth and positive change. I can't thank you enough." William smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "It's what needed to be done, Harold. Now how about that dinner? I hear the chef here is quite exceptional." As they settled back into their seats, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation. But there was a different energy in the air now, one of reflection, of newfound respect, and of the promise of change. William Thorne, the unassuming millionaire in the plain grey sweater, had indeed turned Le Palais d'Or upside down, but in doing so, he had set it on a path towards becoming something far greater than just another exclusive restaurant. He had planted the seeds of true hospitality, of dignity for all, and of the power of second chances. As he raised his glass in a quiet toast, William knew that this was only the beginning. The real work, the hard work of changing hearts and minds, was just beginning. But for the first time in a long while, he felt truly excited about what the future might hold. In the weeks that followed the dramatic events at Le Palais d'Or, William Thorne found himself at the center of a quiet revolution in the Boston restaurant scene. Word of his actions spread quickly through the grapevine of high-end establishments, sparking conversations about inclusivity and customer treatment that had long been overdue. William, true to his nature, shied away from the spotlight. He declined interviews and dodged paparazzi, preferring to work behind the scenes to implement the changes he had promised, but his influence was undeniable. One crisp autumn morning, William sat in his favorite local coffee shop, a small, unpretentious place that had always treated him with warmth, regardless of his attire. He was poring over the latest reports from Le Palais d'Or when a shadow fell across his table. "Mr. Thorne." William looked up to see Michael Chen, the young waiter he had promoted to assistant manager. Michael looked different now, more confident, standing tall in a well-fitted suit. "Michael," William smiled, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Please join me, and I thought I told you to call me Will." Michael sat down, a nervous energy about him. "Sorry, sir. I mean, Will. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," William assured him. "How are things at the restaurant?" Michael's face lit up. "It's been incredible, Sir Will. The new training programs are really making a difference. Just last week, we had a customer come in wearing clothes that would have gotten him turned away before, but our staff treated him like royalty. Turns out he was a food critic for an underground blog. Gave us a glowing review." William nodded, pleased. "That's excellent news, Michael. But I sense there's something else on your mind." Michael hesitated, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "There is, actually. I've been doing some research and, well, I think we can do more." For the next hour, Michael laid out his ideas, a comprehensive plan to expand the inclusivity initiative beyond Le Palais d'Or. He proposed partnering with local shelters to provide job training, working with other restaurants, to create an industry-wide code of conduct, even starting a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth interested in culinary careers. As Michael spoke, William felt a surge of pride. This was exactly the kind of thinking he had hoped to inspire. "Michael," he said when the young man had finished, "this is outstanding work. I'd like you to present these ideas to Harold at our next board meeting. I think you'll find him very receptive." Michael's eyes widened. "Really? You think he'd listen to me?" William smiled. "Michael, you've earned the right to be heard. Your passion and dedication are exactly what we need to drive this change forward." As Michael left, practically bouncing with excitement, William couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. The incident at Le Palais d'Or, painful as it had been, had set in motion a chain of events that was now reaching far beyond the walls of one restaurant. But even as he basked in the glow of progress, a nagging thought tugged at the back of William's mind. There was still one loose end to tie up, one final act of redemption to consider. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Sarah, it's Will. I need you to track down someone for me." The former maitre d' at Le Palais d'Or, Claude Dumont. As he hung up, William knew that the final chapter of this story was yet to be written. And it promised to be the most challenging and potentially the most rewarding of all. The coffee shop buzzed with the usual morning crowd, oblivious to the plans being set in motion at that small corner table. But William Thorne, the unassuming millionaire in his ever-present grey sweater, knew that the ripples of change he had started were about to become a wave, and he was ready to ride it wherever it might lead. A month had passed since William's conversation with Michael in the coffee shop. The changes at Le Palais d'Or were in full swing, and the restaurant had become a beacon of inclusivity in the Boston dining scene. But for William, there was still one piece of unfinished business. It took some doing, but Sarah had finally tracked down Claude Dumont, the former maître d' of Le Palais d'Or. After his dismissal, Claude had struggled to find work in the high-end restaurant industry, his reputation tarnished by the incident with William. He was now working as a night manager at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city. On a chilly December evening, William found himself standing outside that very diner. Through the foggy windows, he could see Claude looking tired and deflated as he wiped down the counter. Taking a deep breath, William pushed open the door. The bell above the door jingled and Claude looked up. His eyes widened in recognition, a mix of fear and shame crossing his face. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" William approached the counter, taking a seat on one of the worn vinyl stools. "Good evening, Claude. I was hoping we could talk." Claude glanced around the empty diner nervously. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, sir. If you're here to gloat or to cause trouble." "I'm here to offer you a job," William interrupted calmly. Claude's jaw dropped. What?" William smiled gently. "Claude, what happened at Le Palais d'Or was unfortunate, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your career. I've been following your progress, and I know you've been struggling. I'm here to offer you a second chance." Claude's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why would you do that after how I treated you?" "Because I believe in second chances," William replied, "and because I think you've learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, we need to fall before we can truly understand how to stand tall." He went on to explain his proposition. A new restaurant was opening, one that would embody the principles of inclusivity and respect that William had been championing. He wanted Claude to be part of it, not as a maître d', but as a trainer, using his experience to teach others how to avoid the mistakes he had made. As William spoke, he could see the change in Claude's demeanor. The man's shoulders straightened, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "Mr. Thorne," Claude said when William had finished, "I don't know what to say. This is more than I deserve." William shook his head. "It's exactly what you deserve, Claude. A chance to make things right, to be part of something bigger than yourself. The question is, are you willing to take that chance?" Claude didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir, absolutely." As they shook hands, sealing the agreement, the bell above the door jingled again. William turned to see a familiar face enter the diner. It was Michael Chen, accompanied by a young woman. As they approached, William could see that Michael looked nervous but excited. "Will?" Michael exclaimed. "I didn't expect to see you here." William smiled. "Just tying up some loose ends, Michael. Who's your friend?" Michael blushed slightly. "This is Emma. She's my girlfriend." William's eyebrows raised in surprise. He remembered the background check on Michael had mentioned a recent breakup. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emma." As they all sat down at the counter, the conversation flowed easily. William learned that Emma was a social worker, passionate about helping underprivileged youth. She and Michael had met at one of the job training seminars organized by Le Palais d'Or. As he watched Michael and Emma together, saw the way they looked at each other, William felt a warmth spread through his chest. This, he realized, was the true reward for all that had happened, not just the changes in the restaurant industry, but the personal transformations, the new connections formed, the lives touched in ways he could never have predicted. Claude, who had been listening to the conversation with growing interest, suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Chen," he said hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. My behavior that night at Le Palais d'Or, it was inexcusable." Michael looked at Claude for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Water under the bridge, Mr. Dumont. We've all grown since then." As they shook hands, William felt as if he was witnessing the final piece of a complex puzzle falling into place. The circle was complete. From humiliation had come growth, from injustice had come positive change, and from a simple act of standing up for what was right had come a ripple effect that was still expanding. As the night wore on, the little diner buzzed with conversation and laughter. William Thorne, the unassuming millionaire in his plain grey sweater, sat at the center of it all, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. And as he looked around at the faces of Claude, Michael and Emma, he knew that this was just the beginning. The story of Le Palais d'Or and its aftermath would be told for years to come, a testament to the power of second chances, the importance of looking beyond appearances, and the profound impact that one person's actions can have on the world. In that moment, William Thorne felt richer than he ever had before.